Steve Portigal, how do you introduce yourself at parties when people ask what you do? What do you tell them?
What do I tell them? I try to avoid. That's a weird party question to have to get into, right? I'm gonna try to avoid it because it's the how much does this person really want to know, and how much common
Yeah.
ground. My answer is going to get like, here's what a researcher has to deal with is figuring out what's our shared common ground. If the person
Right.
doesn't work in product development or tech or something like that,
Yes.
you know, you don't know how much they want to know, and I don't want to give a long rambling answer like the one that I'm giving you right now to your very simple intro question,
No, I
right?
mean, this is unpacking. When somebody says, "Oh, I work in finance," and I put on my user researcher hat and I go, "Oh, well, tell me more about that." And they're like, "No, no, it's really boring." And then I keep asking them questions and I'm like, "Oh, wow, you're right. That's really boring." I take it back.
Oh, you agree with them,
Yeah.
right? I might tell people that I have my own business or
Mm.
that I run a consulting business.
Yes.
And then like, what kind of consulting? Oh, I help companies learn about their customers in order to help them make new products. Oh, what's an example of a company, or what's an example? So is that like market research, or then people try to map it to something that they're familiar with.
Yes.
So peers that we have some overlap in the industry will say something like they'll know something,
Right.
and then other people don't, like people that just don't work in knowledge work kind of environments, just don't have anything to grab it from, and
Yeah.
I don't want to hold forth. So sometimes, like, Steve works for himself. He's written some books. He speaks at conferences in interesting countries.
Yeah.
Like people that I know on Facebook that I see at a party, and I don't
Yes.
know them professionally. Like that's enough, you
Yeah.
know. Uh,
You mean you don't
and
tell them that you're a thought leader?
yeah, because it's always good to lead with that. Well, I'm a thought leader. Well,
Well,
I
so
think if you say you get invited to go to some other country to give a talk, and if I'm there, if it's a
yeah.
party and my partner is there, she'll often sort of pipe up and say, Steve gets invited and I get to go on these trips with him to these countries. So it
Yeah.
it it puts it into a context of something that maybe you can discuss with a stranger, like,
Yeah.
oh, I've been to Shanghai, we've gone here, and then we
Right.
can talk about that.
And not
So
talk about the awkward, like, what do you do? Which is like going straight for the jugular sometimes.
right. I
It's,
mean, if someone is interested, as you kind of said, they'll ask follow-up questions. And then, I'm sure there's some model we could draw of, each question gets you kind of it's like the reverse of the fish eating each other, right? Each question is sort of a bite and then gets you a bigger response.
now, of course, like when you help people gain knowledge of their users, are you still in the room with the customer talking to them? Do you still like do that conversation? Is that still part of what you do?
Yeah, I work with companies in a few different ways. One, and so now we're having that conversation. That's good. So you asked to follow up. We're doing the thing that I said. Yeah,
Yeah.
well, I work with companies in a few different ways, and one is to do research with and for them, right? Go out and talk to their customers and figure
Yeah.
out what we're seeing and what the patterns are, and come back and report on that. But I also help companies to get better at doing that. So I might be
Right.
coaching a team. I
Right.
might be advising them through a process. I might be mentoring or running a training or helping them with planning, sort of sharing thought leadership type stuff, to use that phrase.
Well, I mean, it's a douchey phrase, but I mean, to me, Steve, like I'm always like very like happy and honored to be able to talk to you, because when I met you at one of my early interaction design conferences, like I had already like read all of your blog posts and absorbed. When I was getting into user research, like you were this guy. I was like, oh, I can learn about this from this guy. Okay, great. He's the guy who knows all about this stuff, and I can. And you were very open. You learned out loud, I think, and that was a really cool thing. So you have been a thought leader to me.
I love the phrase "learned out loud." That's the most. That's an honest description, I think, of my process. Hopefully, it's perceived that way, and not.
Yeah,
I have mansplained out loud. I mean, I
yeah,
think
no,
it's
no,
definitely a learning process.
no, absolutely. And I think hopefully you're better at what you do now than than when you started. I don't actually think I know what your origin story is. Like if there was like a radioactive spider that gave you your amazing listening skills when you were a young man. Like I don't want to dwell too much on some of this stuff, but I actually don't think I actually know how you got started and why you do what you do.
Yeah, I mean, so let's do the condensed version. I was born in a log cabin. The condensed version
In the
is
frozen north.
yes. Well, that's true from Canada. Uh, um, I studied human computer interaction and before we had UX. That's kind of what it was called in computer science, but it was not a toolkit for going out and making things. It was just sort of an area of computers that was about people, and that kind of intrigued me. And I came out of graduate school with not really any applicable skills, and I was lucky enough to land in a design consultancy in the mid 90s that was starting to experiment with different tools like ethnographic research, right, contextual research, trying to do things they were calling innovation before we were super sick of that word. And I ended up, I mean, I guess the short version is I ended up apprenticing to user research. You know, I was the person that could watch the videos after the field work had been done, or I could hold the camera and ask one question. And sort of through that, and it's not like the people that I was working with were particularly experienced. It was all new. In terms of applying it. So I got to apprentice, and if you apprentice long enough, you become a journeyman and a master, and that's just what my path was. So spider free, I guess.
Much less traumatic, also.
Oh, there's trauma, but that's we're not going to dwell on that.
No, and because I mean, I've read many of your war stories, and is that book out yet, or is that book not out yet?
Yes, it is.
War stories.
Doorbells, Danger, and Dead Batteries. User Research War Stories. It's been out about 14 months. Anyway, I cut you off to...
No. It's you should. I mean, for those of us who... I mean, I don't go and do field research much anymore, but I remember reading those and just feel... It's like, the Yiddish word is rachmanis. It's compassion. Like, oh God, we've all been there where just something absolutely goes to total complete shit. There's a story I want to. I don't know if I heard this from you or if I read this about you. It's a story about how to get people decide where to go for lunch. And when there's an impasse, you throw out, "Let's go to McDonald's."
Yeah, I can source that. Well, I can't source it because I'd have to look it up. That's not from me. That's from someone who, if we had really magical editing, we would like come back and say so and so. It's in a Medium post, and I used that in a talk, which was, I mean, a really facilitation talk about the power of bad ideas to kind of drive people in. A lot of it's about in creative brainstorming sessions, different ways that you can use bad ideas to move from sort of low hanging fruit to kind of wacky breakthrough. Right. That's kind of the thinking you want to get to. And so one example is from this great blog post, which was about, breaking an impasse. So where do you want to go for lunch? I don't know. Hey, how about we go to McDonald's? Oh, no, I don't want to go there. Let's go to the Indian place in the strip mall. Throwing that idea out, in this guy's narrative kind of prompts people to respond with a specific when they couldn't. So it changes the thinking.
I will no longer attribute that to you. Nevertheless, I still feel like in my mind, you are someone who comes into a group of people who are at an impasse and help to get them going in a new direction. Is that an accurate?
Yeah, I mean, I love running brainstorm workshops or ideation workshops, however we want to label them, when we're trying to figure out what to do with what we've learned from user research. Starting to talk about, well, okay, this is really interesting, and Steve and his team have boiled it down to these key things. What are you guys going to do? I think people need help knowing where to go with that.
Well, that's really. I actually didn't know that you pushed that far into the process. That's really One of the things that I was curious about is like how, starting at the beginning of the research, I know there's lots of different things that they want to know. How do you get people to sort of agree or align to narrow down on this is what we, these are the few sets of things that we want to know? What is that conversation like when there's like, here's a problem to, okay, we're going to do this?
Right. It's sort of a structural. There's a structural element to it. It's not just the set of information, but it's who holds that information. So, right,
Mm,
anytime you get involved with a team, you have, the person that you're working with day to day who's kind of got to act on this stuff. You've got their boss, you've got some other kind of important person that maybe is funding this, different kinds of stakeholders. They're not hierarchical, right? It's a big sort of mess
mm,
of whatever the diagram we would draw to show where these relationships are and where the power is. And you can layer onto that what the assumptions are,
yes,
what the aspirations are. And so by that,
yes.
I mean, it's not like you start to do any kind of research project and people say, I'm really curious about how people will do this or what they think. They will start to tell you about, we're going to make this product that's going to work this way. And
Mm,
so they're telling you what their assumption is. And then based on that assumption, they have some question like, what are the features we can give people that will help them stop doing it this way and start doing it the way we want them to do because that's more profitable?
yes.
So, the job is to sort of talk to those people and understand what lies beneath that and sort of, I don't know if it's a narrowing, you described it as a narrowing. I guess it is sort of a synthesizing process to figure out like what is at a high level, what is this question? Like at the high level, what is this objective? So I might come up with a belief that maybe I just hold to myself. If I start to understand what people's process is
Mm,
for, let's just say, making meals for for themselves, everyday meal prep. If I start to understand what the process is and what those tools are and where the breakdowns are, I'll be able to answer all these questions that the client has, and be able to give feedback on their assumptions about what they think the problem is,
yeah.
and help them prioritize features and help them generate new features. So it is. It's about having conversations with different people. And it starts from the very moment that someone says, Steve, can you help us? Here's what we think our problem is. And then
Mm,
you put together a statement of work that says, hey, these set of activities will give us insight and help us respond to
yeah.
what your business question is. Um,
You talked about
yeah,
these different stakeholders, like the who holds the information and who holds the power. Um, do you try to bring all of those stakeholders together at one time and do a workshop where you work out what this is going to be, or do you just have all of those conversations and synthesize it really well?
it tends to be the latter. Um, I think, being a consultant is about having a relationship and figuring out, with your gatekeeper, what's going to work, what's going to excite people in their culture.
Mm,
Sometimes, hey, we've hired this group of people to help us do research. Like sometimes that's a big moment in the organization,
mm,
and you want to do some things. And I could be cynical and call it theater. It's really more about people's willingness to engage. Like I've done that workshop that you're talking about, where we get people together and we get them in a room for like a few hours, and they're high level people, and they start unpacking their brand's history and the problems in public perception. And I worked with the person that brought us in to. I pitched them that workshop, and they got really excited about it. And that was something that we put into the work, and it was really valuable, and it gave us huge insights. I think to me that's not a make or break piece for the work. I can talk to people individually and kind of start to scrape together enough to synthesize.
yes.
Um, so yeah, I think any process can be sort of pumped up in certain stages and kind of thinned down.
Yes.
And there's things I tend to ask for, like this is really important for you guys to spend more time on. If I could get people together after field work to start making sense of the research together, if I can get them to go out in the field, if I can get them to come together and spend time talking about what bad ideas and good ideas can we come up with that they might move forward on, I'd rather get those touch points with them. Boy, sorry for using the word touch point. I'd rather get their time that way.
You don't have to apologize for using jargon with me. It's
Okay.
totally a thing.
All right, I'm right in the pocket then. I don't even know what that means. I'd rather do it then than at the beginning.
Does calling it a touch point make it feel like innovation theater to you? What's the line? Because you use the word theater, and I've been talking with a friend about what innovation, when what we do becomes theater in a bad way. Are you aware of that, and are you concerned about that?
I don't think so. I don't know. I'm someone who's really into the content, like into the part we're talking about, working with stakeholders to understand their problems and their point of view. That to me is a lot of stimulation and a lot of in-depth conversations, interviews, right? And that sends me off into the world to help them find out something really new and really different that I need to talk about with a lot of nuance. So it's all about the content for me. Which, I mean, who wouldn't say that, right?
No, that's fair.
But I think it's funny. I sometimes am cynical about the theatrical things that I see people do. I worked with one group that they were not my team. They were sort of the adjacent team, and they have a whole thing around black Post-it notes and white. They're not Sharpies, whatever the gel markers are that are kind of white, so you can write on black Post-it notes.
Oh, cool.
And it's the kind of thing
white on
that
black.
It's the kind of thing that I just so want to roll my eyes about, because I think we have been surrounded by people that the more the stuff gets talked about, the more people are kind of tools first and process first, right? Where there's kind of a script. I dug this thing up a few years ago that is from, I don't know, at least 15 years ago. It's a sticky note manifesto. It was written as a manifesto. And it sort of tells you the rules. And it's funny because, let's see, we're talking, and the things that I'm being cynical about, you're getting excited about.
I mean, I'm a theatrical person. Well, that's fair. I mean, I guess I like rules.
And these things, I mean, and so this is very much let's just throw another cliche out. This is very much yes and. Like, it's easy to be snarky about black Post-it notes. And if all you're doing is black Post-it notes and not using that as kind of a handhold for a larger point, then it's stupid. If you're giving people easy to remember sort of scaffolding to deal with a messy, complex process around sense making, then I'm all for it.
Well, what are the black Post-it notes for?
I can't remember. Someone told me what they were for. It might be a bad idea, right? It might be how you say, let's go to McDonald's. So
because I mean, I've been working with the company, the Luma Institute. They do a rose, thorn, bud way of sort of codifying data, and roses are things that are great with from the perspective of a customer. Thorn is something that's painful, and a bud is something that they talked about that has some potential. And it's goofy at first glance, but actually color coding things it's not bad, right? I mean, do you use color with intention in your workshops when you're getting people to analyze and codify data?
Probably not. I mean, I think sometimes if you have breakout groups working, you give them, or I'll ask the people that are providing the supplies, like, a range of colors of this stuff.
Yes.
That's a thing I'd rather have a group self-organize.
Yes.
There might be somebody in a group that says, let's make the pink ones the titles, and then the blue ones will be the groupings.
Yes.
Like, that's great. And so here's where I differ from, Luma or many sort of facilitating type of groups is I don't tend to lean on those rules. I tend to, and this is, I'm not, in no way am I trying to critique. I mean, I told you I was sort of cynical about the Post-it notes because I see them I see the way those can be misused.
Yes.
But I love that kind of process stuff. There's a tone that I think I get sensitive to. So when someone stands up and says, "Okay, we're going to do rosebud thorn, everybody," or whatever the thing was
Sure.
called. Sometimes you find it just becomes jargon. You find yourself
Yes.
stepping into sort of a different way of thinking and talking. I tend to want to meet people where they are a little bit more and use plain language to talk about being creative, thinking divergently, although divergent is not plain language. I make a point of teaching people how might we. That's a piece of jargon. But my verbal or linguistic kit is sort of smaller than Illuma or where it's these colors, it's these kinds of markers, and that's all about scaling, right? And training people to do it, and training people to train other people.
Yes.
I mean, there's kind of reasons for that, and in fact, the Black Post-it note people were very much responsible for creating change across a large organization and running people through those trainings. And that's just not it's not my aesthetic to sort of to grab onto that stuff. I mean, again, I think I'm glad we have multiple flavors of facilitation and process, because different people learn different ways.
So what would you describe as your flavor? You described it as plain, but I'm guessing it's still delicious in a unique way.
Yeah, I mean, I think, it's almost like a trick, people are learning without realizing that they're learning. It's maybe more about talking about fundamentals and then talking about, mnemonics and, easily replicable things. I think that's how I've talked about my own practice. That's how I've talked about interviewing.
Yeah, but so like if you're structuring a synthesis session where you want a group of people to encounter the data and then to arrive at a set of conclusions that are their own, right? And then to get to a set of conclusions that are somehow shared amongst them. This is actually there was the pre-Kolari interview you did with the episode 12, where he talks about you guys both talked about how if you've breathed the same air with all these users, you've lived their stories. How do you turn that into a conviction? You get some sort of conviction about an opportunity. How do you turn that conviction into that? Sorry, I'm going to read this again. How do you turn that into a conviction for everyone else? And I'm guessing, and maybe I'm wrong, that there's two ways to do it. One is like Steve's got a conviction, and you're like, "Here's my conviction," versus like, "Hey, everyone, you look through this stuff as well and tell me what your conviction is. And now let's see what we can convict together." Like which of those are we talking about when you're in a room with a group of people that need to encounter that data? How do you structure that so that they do it in a way that's honest?
So part of it, there's kind of a meta piece here, which is just about what's the role that I've been engaged to play. So, we were talking before about sort of what I do for companies. If I'm the one that's delivering the research, then, ultimately it's Steve's conviction that, I'm going to develop and facilitate in a way that's shared. If it's, I'm, kind of advising on the process, then it's much less about what I think and what I believe and how I interpret it, and more about how I can kind of goad them, poke and prod to kind of, well, maybe it's this. What about that? Oh, that seems very similar to that.
Yes.
I have less of a dog in the fight, right? Like I'm not trying to. So that doesn't mean that the first example isn't shared. And so to get to your question, sort of how do you get to shared alignment? I think it has to happen before the room. I don't want people coming into a room that haven't at least been out in the field. And I usually put together homework exercises. So we're going over transcripts. There's being in the field is it's pretty stimulating, right? There's a lot happening, and if you're new to this, you're probably not able to take away too much. And if you're, teams I work with, I might go talk to, let's just say 10 people, and each of the people on the team might come to one or two. So they're not even getting the same experience in the field.
Yeah.
But I'd like them to come in with having done some work, going over a transcript of that interview. I have kind of guidance and advice about how to pull things out of that. So that's this is analysis and synthesis. Analysis is taking a big piece and breaking it down into smaller pieces. So an interview is, let's say it's 60 minutes, it's 35 pages. You tag 24 interesting things. That's the analysis, right? And you're coming in having already done some analysis. So, everyone comes in with something, and maybe I've done more, and maybe I'm faster at it or better at it because I'm the expert that's been brought in.
Yeah.
But boy, it's interesting to see what other people see and hear and what they think is interesting. And then, we need time to start sharing those individual pieces. I mean, this is when analysis becomes synthesis, right?
Yes.
Synthesis is taking small pieces and building them up to something else. And that is a form of brainstorming, of conversation. So someone says, hey, there's a point I've marked off here in the transcript when we talked to, Daniel. He had a really interesting story about how he acquired his microphone stand, and he told us blah, 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 this and this and this. Everyone stops, and then we chew on that, and then we throw out a story that happened in another interview, or we try to extrapolate. What would Daniel have said if we had that microphone stand, half the size? Or do you think he would use that in his car? We start sort of riffing a little bit, like extrapolating from the data that we have. And the person that's read the transcript can say, he actually talked about that later on. We asked that question, and we know this and we know that. And so we kind of dwell on this individual point that's been put out into the room from the person sharing the transcript until we can come up with some, not conclusion, but sort of suppositions, some themes.
Yeah.
And those are things that you write in a Post-it note.
Yeah.
And then maybe at the end of the interview, at the end of this storytelling, we'll get together and put the Post-its up on the wall, cluster them, start to title them. So we're making sense of kind of at an atomic level, and then recombining, right? Analysis, break into small things, synthesis, build up into new big things.
Yeah.
So that is happening together. And it doesn't mean that at the end of it, we know everything that we have to say, right? It still has to get processed and refined and turned into a story, turned into a report, turned into kind of key takeaways. And then we still have to say, well, what should we do about it? We're not even into how do you act on it. That's sort of what that bad ideas, that idea generation workshop. So when we're making sense of the field work, we're not talking about what you're going to do about it. And
You separate those two things out very clearly.
Yes. Yeah.
What I love about this, about your process so far, is that one of the things that I've identified is that separating thinking alone and thinking together is really valuable. And the homework you give to people to think on their own and to sort of go through transcript and pull things out, that is a really important quiet time. There's no way I think you could sort of put a transcript up on a PowerPoint projector and say, okay, everybody, let's what do you notice? Right? I mean, I suppose you could do that. I'm sure there's somebody who will listen to this who will be like, oh, that's what we do. And maybe that's fine. But I like that you give people that very sacred thinking solo time before we start to munge all of our perspective. And there's that mixing of like, oh, I noticed this, I noticed that, and it gets more and more in sync. I guess I'm gonna like pause and I want to talk about improv, because I think there's a similar entanglement that happens in like the group mind. Do you want to talk a little bit about your improv background and what why you like it? And what sort of place it fits into your life? If that makes sense.
Yeah. I'm kind of what am I? A relapsed improviser? I don't know.
Prolapsed.
I'm not sure what the right adjective is. Inactive, I'm not an active improviser. Um, if by that we mean like going to take improv classes or doing improv shows.
You're not in a group anymore.
Yeah, I'm not in a group anymore. Yeah. I'm not. Yeah. I mean, it was a long time ago already that I sort of had that troop experience, and it was really amazing sort of time of my life. And I was just looking to get better at creativity and better at brainstorming. And I'd always heard of improv. I didn't understand what it meant, that it's not about scripting. It's about, scripting is one sort of side of the continuum, and improv is way at the other end, where it's about letting ideas flow and build off of each other and not judging them.
Yes.
And that's such a joyful kind of problem solving experience.
Yeah.
And I sort of miss being part of that group, but again, it's like a whole other era of my life. But that trains part of you, and I think it's something that maybe I can try to turn on and go into that mode. And I think people that live it are they're like, you just say yes to things. You kind of embrace the world in a certain way. That's not my natural gravity, but so having it as a toolkit to pull from, either in a social situation or a work situation or a whatever, is kind of a fun way to go.
Well, what do you see as the toolkit that you do pull from? Like, what's the shiniest tool in the toolbox for you that you take out?
I mean, I'm just going to follow on that. I mean, the why we have the cliche yes and, right? It's about saying yes to things.
Yeah.
And not because we should, because we're good people and we care about making a happier planet. It's because really cool stuff happens when you say yes. I love listening to comedians on the radio or in TV or in a podcast or whatever. Like, they will often argue with each other. There is kind of a way that comedians really push on each other.
Yeah.
But you hear them say yes to each other. And so when someone says, right, you're still driving around in that that 73 Corolla that you used to have, implying that the person is poor and not a success or whatever, the person will say, yeah, it's a great car and it's this. They'll make a joke about that, even though you think they're kind of losing the argument, but everybody kind of wins.
Yeah.
So that way the comedians, the shtick between them works because they say yes to the premise of this person having a crappy old car, and then they make another joke, and it doesn't, even though they're fighting, it goes somewhere.
Yeah.
And so that way that that yes between two people, even in conflict, creates something new. That's a gestalt of it's just, like I said before, that's joyful.
Yeah.
To kind of see that happen.
It is.
What so was to me? That's go ahead.
No, sorry. I was wondering what the flavor of improv was that you were doing. Were you a Harold improviser? Were you doing scenes and skits, or what was the sort of troupe experience you had?
It was just all games,
like,
right? Skits and games. So and it would be kind of in this class format, and everyone would do it. So the teacher would kind of explain, okay, we're going to show a debate between two people that don't speak English. You two are going to be the debaters, and then you two are going to offer the translation of what they're saying.
Yeah.
What's the topic for the debate? Okay, go. First group has to kind of figure it out. We watch. We laugh as much about it being funny. Probably more we laugh because it's amazing to watch people try to problem solve through these things.
Yeah.
And again, there's the joy. Why improv is funny for me is not because people are hilarious, but because seeing the problem solving, the creative problem solving happen, just tickles me so much. So you watch somebody else do it, and then you got to get up and do it. And then eventually you figure it out, and then you want to do it again, and now we're on to the next game.
Yeah. You are you are a content guy. Like, I think the human content of these games is like inherently enjoyable to you. And, the game of let's all read what we thought was interesting about this person and is just that's a fun game. Like that's a game that you play with that group of people. It's the synthesizing game, and people are yes-anding and saying like, okay, I pulled this out. Oh, I pulled that out. That's similar to that, but also different. Oh, it's actually completely different, but it's also interesting. And they just work on it until it's a scene, right? Until you get to the punchline, right? That's how you know when it's done. I'm guessing there's no other formula than just to be there.
That's really profound. No, that was a sincere. That's really profound. That was a sincere. That's really profound. Because I often remember a synthesis workshop we did that I think maybe we spent 2 days, maybe we just spent 1 day, and 3/4 of the way through the day we are dead. Right? This is such draining work.
It is,
and I had some really great people. They were my clients and some people that I'd known, that I'd been in the field with. And I'd known them anyway, just professionally and socially for years. And at one point, this one woman who's on the team just says something. And I don't remember what it was, nor could I even share it in this context.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe this is a terrible story, but she just says something. And, it was just this moment where it was like it was not like a big pronouncement. It was just sort of a quiet observation, but it just brought me low. It just pulled together all the threads that had been sort of loose. And I was on a higher plane after that. I mean, I'm being very woo-woo with my language, but it was this magic thing that kind of got made. And you could demarcate the workshop before she said that one, like she said 10 words, the workshop before and the workshop after. And, I took what happened, and then I had a lot more work to do to kind of organize it and structure it and pull together. But, it took us being together all day for this person and really throwing a lot of stuff around, right? It's just very intense. Speculating and trying different ways to fit things together to see what happens. For somebody to have it. I probably wasn't even an aha for her, but it induced one in me. And that's the improv thing, right? That's playing the game, and you can assist somebody else to kind of create a new thing. And that's like end scene, right? We kind of got to that point.
So when you heard it and you repeated it, did she hear it once you said it, or did it take some time to sort of land on everyone else's ears?
I think we paused and kind of celebrated it and added to it and made it kind of a moment. I mean, it's the opposite of the McDonald's thing. Sometimes something comes into the room and everyone just goes, yes, 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 yes. And we kind of build on it and get excited about it. And,
that is so cool. It feels like the games are something we do to not distract us, but you can obviously be funny without these improv games, but the games are something you do to sort of help you get to that moment. And it seems like you do have some games that help you synthesize. Are there other synthesis games, ways you approach getting people to synthesize that you find are effective?
Yeah, again, this goes back to the different styles, and you can imagine the black Post-it note, or the Luma approach to synthesizing as, let's try, a cross pollination. Let's try, Brian Eno's oblique methods, right? Do you know
Which
those?
are great.
Right?
Those cards are wonderful.
Right. Do it backwards. Go outside and do it. And
take something, remove something, and throw it away. Right. That's the approach.
Yeah. And I think I tend to be someone that has an incomplete set of tools like that are more implicit.
Yes.
I think about myself that way as a field worker, as an interviewer. I don't necessarily, so sometimes you can step back and say, well, what are all these things? But I'm not sort of calling an audible and saying, let's do this, let's do that.
Yes.
It's for me, much more about, come prepared, set the stage, create the environment, what makes it a safe place to kind of dig into the stuff, trying to model some storytelling,
Yes.
and for things to happen. That's my style. If there's sort of a continuum of styles,
Yes.
having the games as explicit games that you would teach people and try them, then starts to raise the question: how do you know what game is right to use at which time? I don't know. That's sort of what makes us the experts. But I haven't gotten explicit with what those games are. And I think I tend to be a little more brute force. If you just do the storytelling, and you've got the right group of people or close to the right group of people, like cool stuff will happen.
Yes. Yeah. And that moment, there will be a moment where once you've set the stage, provided time for people to think clearly on their own, the process of being in the room and capturing stuff on sticky notes and reflecting will get people to that moment. It's just it's a crank and you grind it out.
Yeah.
Right? There are no shortcuts. It's interesting because I guess on my side, I was sort of taking notes. I was like, okay, games that help synthesize, games that help people ID, and games that help people choose. And it seems like that is not, you don't have even though you love improv, you don't have a gamified approach. You have a being present and being a practitioner approach to it, right?
Which is what I love about improv. I love sort of the things that happen, and less the, the only time I go back and pull upon games is when I want to demonstrate improv to people.
Yes.
So the game where you're a translator, or the game where you go stand in a circle and everyone says one word to tell a story. Yeah. I like those because it models listening. It models letting go of predicting what's going to happen. It models sort of, helping your partner succeed. And those are sort of principles. Those are muscles that make for great improv, great synthesis,
Yeah. Well, I remember I went to a workshop of yours years ago where you did some improv exercises with us. Do you use improv when you're teaching teams about research still? Is improv part of your teaching style?
I don't know that I would teach somebody explicitly about improv when helping them to go out in the field.
Like that listening, the telephone game, that you use that in that workshop to teach us about here's this loss experience. Like, what does this mean for us in research?
I definitely make use of those exercises when we do the synthesis. I'm sorry, not the synthesis. How might we act on what we've learned? So kind of at the end of the process, we talked about this workshop first, but it's the one that sort of happens at the end. So we've learned things from research. We want to get people together, want them to understand bad ideas, want them to understand saying yes. And so sometimes I will practice a little bit of improv with them, like have them do one of these things, have them debrief on it, have them talk about what principles they see, and then show them how we're going to apply that to this. When I want groups, especially when you get teams that just are not familiar with the stuff at all, and this is sort of scary for them, and they're we're trying to get everybody. I worked with people from a college library. And this was really, really foreign and really challenging to their way of thinking.
Yes.
So giving them, one thing you want to do in a workshop, right, is help them see why this is not business as usual. Yes. And that we're not sort of, I sometimes think of problem solving kind of as like a clenching thing, like just squeeze your brain and the answer will come out. And as opposed to sort of trusting this weird indirect process, and many things come out, and then some of those we'll use, to give people permission to do that.
Yeah.
Letting them stand up and throw a ball around, or try to tell a story, or do the broken telephone thing, or whatever it is, that's sort of funny and silly and awkward and reveals something about what I want them to do. My hope is that gives them permission to then, like if I teach people about bad ideas, they'll do that in their breakout groups, and they'll tell me like, hey, we came up with a really bad thing. I'm like, great, what is it? And So if we want to get some output, and I want them to feel comfortable with being creative in a
Yeah.
different way, and hopefully some of that process will stick with them. Yeah, so improv is a way to model that and to kind of break the frame of what a workshop is. Depending on if they're, you don't want to be, if that's too scary for them, I don't want to do it. Or if it seems too uncomfortable, I don't want to push people all the way out of their comfort zone and make them like regret that they came to this workshop.
Right.
So, it's a module that I can include in a workshop.
Yeah. How much time would you spend with a group on the sort of, okay, well, here's this research now. Let's talk about idea generation. How much time do you feel like people have an appetite for spending with you on that?
I try to do it in 2 separate sessions because they're different environments and they're different mindsets. So presenting or doing a readout or a share out or whatever we call it nowadays in corporate America.
Yes.
That's one day, but that takes place on one day.
Mm-hmm.
Ideally, I'd like to come back the next day and sort of start fresh. Let it gel overnight. Let people kind of think about it. That's a few hours to have that meeting, depending on how much bandwidth they have. We discuss, but we don't start talking about what we're going to do about it. We come back the next day. Maybe we're in a different room. I mean, depending on how much people are willing to put into it, we've gone off site for that meeting. You set up a room that looks very, very different, that looks more like, a creative room. And so again, we're into the theater a little bit, and I think it's about, so I'm not entirely opposed to things being theatrical because it sets the stage. Okay, I'm using the metaphor to explain the metaphor. It gives permission. It gives permission to solve problems differently, and you're in a different room than you are for watching a presentation deck. We'll do like a quick recap of what were the key takeaways from the research, and we'll talk. So that would be a great one-day workshop. 30 minutes of recap, 30 minutes of kind of improv training and exercise. 50 minutes to give them their first assignment, and then just start doing breakouts and sharing back, and then rotating kind of through different things, and kind of work through going divergent, and then maybe a little bit of converging at the end of the day. It's hard, obviously, this to get people for a whole day.
Yes, it is.
It's the groups that really want to get everyone involved where you can get a lot of people for a long time.
So you talked about their first assignment, rotating and converging, and I'd love to just dig into those a little bit more about like what you do to get people to to think that first assignment, like they're spending 15 minutes on their own brainstorming. Like, how do you structure that for them? How do you give them that ability to think?
Yeah, this is where we haven't talked about the how might we question specifically, but and how might we is a big piece of jargon, but it's a lovely piece of jargon, and people that know it come across it as HMW out there in the world.
Yeah,
right? It's it's a touchstone for sort of the design thinking world and the creative problem solving world.
Yeah,
I feel like I want the research to output that how might we questions.
yes,
Or sort of the thing that comes after how might we. So how might we help people integrate across different platforms when they're doing blah 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 blah. So the research might reveal people want to integrate across platforms, or it might just say help people do this and this. That might be the output of the research.
Yeah.
When you say how might we, it's now an invitation. So coming into this workshop with 5 to 10 would be a lot of how might we questions. Some set of how might we questions.
Yeah.
Teaching them a little bit about generating ideas, about saying yes to each other, about generating multiple ideas, about trying to be specific in the ideas, about drawing them so that you have different representations, and then turning them loose. And I tend to be a little hands off and just see what they're going to do,
Yeah.
and kind of circulate. And some groups will get out the black Post-it notes, and some groups will start drawing, and everyone will kind of work at it a different way.
Yeah.
I want to create a space where they can do different things. There'll always be one group that's just completely stalled and doesn't know what to do.
Yeah.
And they'll just sort of restate the problem to each other over and over and over again. And I might come and sort of and hover with them and start writing down the things that they are saying, and like telling them, like, write it down, write it down, write it down, because they don't know how to start capturing it.
Yes.
It doesn't feel safe that those are recommendations. They just want to talk.
Yeah.
Yeah. I want to. Can I throw back to you to follow up here? Because I'm not sure how you want me to keep going through the whole.
No. I mean, it's very interesting because you have a sort of a very open and like loving approach to. You're like, okay, so here's the research. Here's some improv stuff. Here's how my we statement is, and here's write your ideas down. Like, go generate some how might we's. That might be their first assignment. That's not necessarily having ideas. That's thinking about the problem statement, right? And so you do say, okay, let's think about the problem statement. You break them up into small groups, and then you get into the actual ideation, right?
Yeah, I don't want them to go divergent on the how might we's, because the how might we's are the distillation of the research.
Yeah.
And so this is where we draw the through line, right, from research to idea generation, which is so easily thrown away, right? It's hard to carry that all the way through, but if the research produces those how might we's, and so here's just a tactical thing. You can't come to this workshop if you haven't come to the readout the day before.
Yes.
Right? Because it's definitely about acting on the research.
Yeah.
I don't want people coming in with their pet ideas that they've been holding on to and pushing them into the brainstorming. It has to be in response to the things that we have identified from the research.
Yeah, relevant to and about from those things. So, there's the readout. You want them to be to respect and to absorb it, and that the ideas, the how might we's, are from that research. Or do they leave with, when you talked about converging, is it about leaving with like an idea that everyone's like, yeah, we're going to do that? Or is it like, oh, here's an approach to how we could do many things? Or is it like, okay, here's 4 top things. How do you get them from, there's that messy, like, here's the everything to the like, oh, here's the one thing. Like, what is, how many threads, and how do you get that part there to suck down? Because that does not narrow itself down.
Right. I mean, it's definitely diverge needs to shift gears to go converge. And this is a negotiation or an exploration, at least, with the people that are kind of owning this, right? Because if you work as a consultant, at some point you leave. So who's going to be left with this mess, and what are they trying to accomplish? I've worked with design groups that just want a lot of broad input, and they're like, "This is great. We've just looked at this in so many different ways," and they are fine. We might do the very simple. What is it called? Dot voting. You give everybody some amount of Post-its, go around and like tag your favorites. Don't over constrain the criteria.
Yeah.
And then do a little debrief. Go around the room and
wait. So when you say don't over constrain the criteria, you mean like just dot what you like, not like here's a blue dot for this and here's a red dot for cost effective, blue dot for great for the business, red dot for the user, green dot for something your mom would love.
Right. Should we be flagging ones that we should do, or flagging ones that I wish we would do, or flagging ones that we can do? It's like I tried not to get into that and just see. It's kind of about taking the temperature of the room and seeing kind of where their heart is.
Yeah.
I think of converging as kind of, first you do it with the heart and then you do it with the mind. So let's assume they want to go a little further than just what the dot voting reveals. Then I'd make sure I have time with a very small group of people, like 4 would be a lot. And then, we go from the boards on the wall with the Post-its to a spreadsheet.
Mm.
and type everything up in the spreadsheet. And this is where those criteria that you were throwing out,
Yeah.
right? Is it a strategic alignment? Is it profitable? Is it technically feasible?
Yes.
And I get a very small group of people, and we try to go through quickly and give everything. Here's a little. I have a little process trick here. You rank it either a 0, 1, or a 2. 0 means not at all, right? So, like if uniqueness is something, and you come up with fidget spinners, then that gets a 0 for
Yeah.
uniqueness. It is not unique at all. If it's out of the ballpark, it gets a 2, and then everything else gets a 1. There's no way if you did 0, 1 to 4, you're going to argue between a 2 and a 3, and it's not clear what the differences are. It's just a very human interpretation. So not at all, out of the ballpark, and everything else.
Yeah, that's like marry, fuck, kill, basically. Right? There's really there's only 3 things.
That's a really interesting. That comparison makes no sense whatsoever, but there's the pull quote for the whole episode.
Yeah, I hope not. Well, no, because you said it's interesting. You said the heart first and then the mind, but it sounds like this group that you invite for the ideation session might just be the heart, and the mind is actually in another room at another time.
I think you want to do it right after, because one thing that happens is that no matter how much you ask people to make sure to capture the ideas in a way that we will know what they are afterwards and sign your name so we can trace it back.
Yes.
There's still stuff where you look at it and you're like,
what was that?
Disintermediated, downshifting. Like, what? Or there's a picture of like a guy standing in front of a car and it says, one word. And so sometimes I even put a coding in for how well articulated is the idea. like, do we know what it is? Could we go and make it?
Right.
Because you're just trying to screen out things that don't work. So ideas that something that gets a 0 is going to rank lower. So it's nice to sort of go from the big group meeting to the smaller meeting and just pound through that spreadsheet. And then, then you have to sort, right? You just sort it and see how do the things that did well with the heart do when you do more of a cold-blooded mental analysis. And then what happens next really depends on what kind of endeavor are we undertaking? Are they trying to, create new products? Are they trying to prioritize features for something they are making? Are they, looking for white space? There's so many different frames that people kind of come into this exercise with.
Yeah.
Sometimes my clients just think they want to learn about their users, and I'm kind of pushing them to talk about how they might act on that, because that's actually the way that I think research will stick with them. Is it's a way to kind of help them learn what the research revealed, is talk about what they could do.
Yeah, to make it actionable.
Yes. And having them do that translation, right? It's not my 27 ideas, it's their 27 ideas. So they've processed these inputs from me, and now I think they own it more. So yeah, I come up against all kinds of situations based on what that group is about and how much commitment they have to go forward and what they're trying to explore, what they're trying to understand. And, I think, making this about how you may act on it, I think is safe. They still don't have to commit to acting on it. I hope they will commit to doing something.
Yeah.
Because we've all invested a lot of energy and passion into this exercise all the way through. But it sets them up. It sets them up for a lot of different things that they could do.
Well, it sounds like you want to make sure that there's strong momentum to continue, like long. You said you're the consultant. Your engagement will end at some point, and you want to make sure that there's enough momentum where something really that there's impact, right? And if people aren't owning the research, if they're not all aligned on what it actually means, then that's not going to happen.
Right. And I think we model this activity then, even if they don't walk out knowing that tomorrow morning they're going to start working on the new, woozy-wooza thing that they came up with, but they at least sort of know where that information is. And so if they pick this stuff up in 3 months, then, they can recall it more quickly, and they can pick it back up when there is more of an imperative to take action. So I can't change what's going to happen the next day, but I can set them up to be more successful when they do return
Yeah.
to it.
Have you gotten better at that over the years? Thinking about like when you started going out on your own to now, like, are you better at making sure that they're well armed without you?
I mean, I think the workshop that we're describing and some of these processes, I wasn't always doing this, but I've probably been doing it for about 10 years. Um, yeah, I don't think that I've gotten better at it. And I feel like there are forces arrayed against us being successful in this ultimately. Like
Yeah.
I feel worried or skeptical sometimes, even though I'm, sitting here championing sort of what I think is my best practice. Um, you know, these are the times in which you come up with interesting resistance. Like, if you can get to this workshop, I think that's really great.
Mm,
The ways I've seen people refuse to have this workshop despite paying for it, despite it being in the statement of work, like they just don't want to do it, um, is fascinating to me. And so I definitely feel like, oh, I've failed to have the impact I hope that I could have because they're only going to go so far into the water with me.
mm,
And we might have done a lot of work and they won't have this workshop. And I think so. A shortcoming of mine is not understanding why and not being able to propose alternatives or to kind of, nip that in the bud a little bit to get them to do something else.
yeah.
Um, the sort of the end of the research process, whether it's workshops and reporting and all that, is where you start to encounter lots of forms of resistance. Like, yes, we agree with what you're saying about our customers. Oh, and by the way, they're wrong because we do all these things, and they don't understand this, and they're this, and they're that, and
Right. It's their fault. They don't know the buttons there. Right.
yeah, and so you do all the things, many of which we haven't dug into because we don't have 20 hours about ways to help avoid that, but it's still going to happen.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's an individual, and sometimes it's the whole group. Um, I don't know. I did a workshop recently where I was co-facilitating, and it was a lot of different things than what we talked about today. But I gave a very quick summary of the research, and I was talking, hey, group that makes a thing. Here's the ways you're thinking and acting that are problematic for the users that we're talking to. So lots of reasons why that could be very uncomfortable for them. Like I criticize them and the kind of the core way they were looking at what their initiatives were, and they embraced it. And the words that I was using to describe were words that they began to use.
Hmm.
And as we talked more and more and more about other things, they would keep referring back to this thing that I had just taught them. Oh, because we have a this or because we're doing it this way, using the phrase that I said,
Yeah.
we have to avoid that. And so here's a specific action that we could take. I loved that. Like, it's so cool to hear your words come back to you. So I have a lot of respect for teams that are willing to, I mean, it's that joke about telling someone their baby is ugly. It's worse than that because I was kind of telling them they were bad parents and that's why their baby was ugly. And they acknowledged being bad parents and just started focusing on how to be better parents. That is just not, that takes a lot of personal strength, and
Yes.
comfort with yourself. And I just love seeing them kind of just dig into that. And it made me feel like I did a good job, to your point about am I
Yeah.
better at it or not. Um, and I can't take all the credit, right? It's the credit goes to them for their willingness. And obviously there's ways that I can be a jerk about it or not a jerk about it and kind of help them
Right.
understand something new and have it be like an okay thing, not a criticism.
Well, and
So
I'm sure it was done with you were present in the moment and you delivered it with a certain amount of love. I'm guessing with compassion. You weren't doing it because you wanted to crush their egos. You were doing it because you wanted them to be better. And I think it sounds like they took it the way it was intended.
yeah, it was a great moment. I mean, I think I want to dwell on that. And that's the most recent time I've had that kind of experience and or done that workshop at all. And to have it go so well is really nice.
That's awesome. I think there's a lot of what you're asking people to do is do things differently than they currently do them, and that's hard, right? People would much rather just go on. It's just physics, just inertia, and the fact that these people were willing to like take it to another level. That's obviously that's what keeps you doing it, right?
Well, right. It makes me feel like I can have some impact, and because I can always learn something that I think they need to know that they don't know, that they're not acting on. Like I have no lack of confidence in my ability to find nuance that is sort of not exploited by them. And I'm confident that I can help them understand what I'm trying to tell them that's different than how they're looking at it. But it's inconsistent whether or not they will embrace and kind of accept and take some ownership of those things.
Yeah.
Even with the best facilitation, I don't mean that I am always doing the best facilitation. In fact, this example we're talking about, like I said, somebody else ran this meeting in a different way and sort of set the stage and created the environment in a way that is different than what I would have done. And so, there's lots of people to kind of give credit to.
Yeah.
So it's an area for me to continue to improve and continue to try different things and cross fingers a little bit sometimes too. Like, geez, I hope these guys will go for it today, and maybe they'll go for it in the next meeting, if not today. Hopefully there's a few bites of the apple.
I think that's a really good place to at least say, is there anything we haven't talked about that we should talk about with regards to how we get groups to shift and change and build alignment? Is there anything we haven't talked about that you wanted us to talk about? Make sure that we address it. Or final parting thoughts from Steve Portigal.
I think there's something, not to add a whole other chapter to this discussion already, but there's something about indirect and direct that I've just been chewing on since we started talking about having this conversation.
Yeah.
And maybe I can say more about what I mean by that.
Please do.
Like I was describing how if I have a breakout group and they're just talking and they're not writing anything down, and I'll kind of come over and sort of stage whisper at them, sort of in a comedic scolding way. Write it down.
Yes.
And do it and sort of try to get them to do it the way that I'm teaching them and push on them, but kind of make a joke about it because I don't want to be an actual scold. So I'm kind of a mock scold.
Scold?
Yeah.
Right.
But I'm going to mostly let the groups do their own thing. I might go and sort of sit on a chair 2 feet back and kind of watch and maybe do nothing. Or maybe stop the room and say, hey, everybody, here's a great thing that this group is doing. I think there is a much more sort of directive facilitating style, which people who are, and maybe it's an introvert versus extrovert thing. I don't know. And I'm sort of, you can tell me, or people are much more, we keep using the word theatrical. And I mean, people who are a little more sort of loud and direct and stagey and kind of, look people in the eye and call them by name or call out the person that's not talking.
Yes.
Charles, you seem quite quiet right now. Are you?
Yeah.
Or I can tell from your face that you're not sure about this. What do you think? Like that's in the best practices for facilitation manual.
Is it? Wow.
There's a great thing that Stanford D School put up. I think that I posted on social media like 6 months ago that I can find for you after if you like, that lists all these great practices. And, one of those is like looking at people's faces and calling attention to sort of the elevator.
But I wouldn't actually necessarily call out the introvert because that makes them feel shitty sometimes.
Yes.
So I wouldn't necessarily call that a best practice. So wait, but it sounds like you're saying that are you an indirect facilitator? It sounds like you're an indirect facilitator.
Yeah. I mean, I agree with you on not doing that, but I've seen people who are extroverts as facilitators.
Yes.
Like there's something about sort of someone's charmingness. And, there's a way to call Charles out for being quiet that, makes him go back.
Which is like you going, hey, write it down.
Right.
Hey, Charles.
Right. Or like, Charles, you seem awfully quiet right now. Is there
Yeah.
anything that's going on for you? Uh-huh. And I don't mean to make fun of that person. I mean, I can't do that.
Yeah.
That's not in my energy.
Yes.
But I've seen people do that and sort of bring a level of earnestness.
Yes.
This workshop that I was describing, my co-facilitator asked people what gifts they had to kind of offer,
Yes.
which was very earnest and is not very me. Uh, but it worked, and she did it in a very, I think, genuine way. And it's I think it's back to what we were talking about sort of language or ways of making things be different.
Yes.
Having black post-it notes, having a rosebud thorn exercise.
Yes.
These are all ways to say, just like I'm doing with improv and staging the room a little bit differently. This is not your normal meeting. It's okay to talk about gifts.
So wait, what is your way of accomplishing the same thing? Like, you clearly do want people to write things down, and you want Charles to speak up because you want everyone to be participating equally. How
but
do you accomplish?
I might leave Charles alone.
Yeah.
I mean, I think, and I'm not saying that's the best way to facilitate. I just think it's hard for me to empower Charles without confronting Charles.
Yeah.
And I think that's either sort of a personal limitation or maybe it's my introversion. And so I'd rather be indirect. I might come sit with that group. And it's one thing when you have the room and one thing when you have the group. And, if the group is humming, I'm less worried about what the individual in that group is doing. There's a lot of people to take care of in a 20-person workshop. And if the group is kind of doing something, I'll sort of check in with whoever is going to engage with me, whoever is writing, whoever is talking the most.
Yeah.
And so I'm sure people have suboptimal experiences because they might need someone to kind of draw them out more.
Yeah.
And to me, that's this more directive thing where you're really paying attention to what everybody is doing, and you're going to get up in their grill a certain amount maybe in a friendly way. And I even think about just people that use other people's names and don't. Like, if you're going to call someone out, can you say Charles? Like, that's harder for me to kind of call them by their name. I don't know why that is. And it's I don't know. We're sort of ending on a down note of weird things about facilitation.
No, well, because what's interesting to me is that, like, one thing that I've come to with facilitation is that people need to own who they are and utilize it. And it's not necessarily like everyone isn't loud and stagey and everyone doesn't love improv. And, I use origami in my facilitation teaching because that's part of who I am. I grew up doing it. And so you use who you are, and leaving the introverts alone and dealing with the people who are willing to engage with you is that's a legitimate strategy. It's called the coalition of the willing, right? I don't think there's anything wrong with saying, like, okay, here's the research. Let's talk about it. And if you're not interested, that's cool. Like, you came to this meeting and you didn't realize what you were getting yourself into.
Yeah. And I don't mean to come off needy here. I think I love watching, whatever process I'm doing, whether it's researching or facilitating or brainstorming, I love watching how other people do it. And sometimes I see things to adopt. Sometimes I see things that I wish I could do, but I can't.
Yeah.
Sometimes I see things that no, I would never do that. And I think that's wrong, or that works for them, but not for me. So we talk about sort of always learning about this stuff. This is definitely things I'm always learning. I'm very comfortable with the fact that I would interview someone different than you would, and it would be right for me, and it would be successful. I'm less confident in the same thing being applied to facilitation. I don't know, just because, again, I'm not trying to come off as needy. I think your point that we all do it kind of authentically who we are. It's great to learn how other people do it, and if someone's listening to this that's like, hey, I always call people by their name. What the hell's wrong with you, Steve? Great. And if someone's listening to this thinking like, yeah, people's names is sort of like an intrusive thing. Whatever. I guess just if we keep reflecting on the choices we make and what our comfort zones and strengths are, then that's a way to get better at it. I up-talked there. That's a way to get better at it.
I think so focusing on your comforts and strengths is a way to get better at it. You mentioned stealing things from other people. Is there something you've stolen recently that you're like, this is really helping me? besides black Post-its, which you're obviously using all the time now.
Right. I respect the black Post-its for what they are. I mean, I think it's a totem of sort of different things. I'm not consistent at doing this, but the first time I went to a meeting and someone showed up with their extra large Ziploc bag with markers and Post-its in there. I mean, it's a very tactical thing, and I'm not as good at doing this. This is sort of my laziness. But in fact, this last workshop I was talking about, the person I was running it with showed up with their own sticky note easel pads and their own markers. In fact, I think they had their markers in like one of those felt roll-up things like chefs have where they roll up their knives.
Yeah.
It was like someone who's really serious about the visualization part and stuff. Like I tend to just deal with whatever's in the room.
Yeah.
And you show up and we were at a big company with a lot of money and a lot of resources, but of course the camera didn't work to kind of network somebody and all these things didn't work.
Yeah.
And, she brought all her own stuff. I think it's a great best practice, whether it's just your little sort of Ziploc kit with your 4 markers you could bring to every meeting. Are you going to show me one that you've got? Yeah. Okay. Right. And that's your go bag, right? It's always packed. Yes. Oh my gosh. So you're holding up exactly what I'm describing. Yeah. I don't have one of those. I think that's, just this conversation is making me think I should.
The key is I actually showed up in a group where they didn't have, it's like you think every room in the universe has expo markers and it doesn't. And then you're like, geez.
Yeah. I think it's maybe just sort of laziness.
You're casual and indirect.
But sometimes somebody has to then go scramble and find this stuff. But I think I maybe make that somebody's problem. And in fact, my colleague left those sticky note pads there, even though, again, this place has more money than you can imagine, and they could just order those and have them in every room. But she, sole proprietor, she kind of brought that stuff in and left that. The tools make it go smoothly, and I've stolen it. I just haven't kept it up. So I like to see a little pack there.
Yeah, I'm clearly just going to need to design a facilitator chef roll and then just give you one. That'd be the thing to do.
That would be awesome. Yeah, not too precious, right? It's got to look a little casual, but
this is actually my IXDA 10 bag, which I just still love because it's a perfect little thing. It's denim. It's not too precious. Yeah, I think, coming with your tools that you need. What I love about your approach is that you're like, well, actually, I don't need any tools. I'm going to make do with whatever I have. And that's pretty awesome.
But we do. We need, and it's not like we haven't emailed back and forth about what should be in the room. So I'm not completely casual about it. Like I have some standard text that I usually just copy and paste from, or I have to go find it in my notes file so that I'm not always writing up what we need.
And then they still get the wrong sticky notes.
Right.
They still get pop-up ones, which drive us all crazy.
Right. Which is why people like you that brought your own can just sort of come in and I might just curse or I might just shrug about it or someone has to run down to another room in the other building to get that stuff.
And got proper sticky notes. Oh, God.
Yeah. So, bringing your own stuff I think is a great thing that I don't do, but I've seen other people do. And I don't know. I'll try to be more mindful of doing that or not doing it, just making a choice, not just defaulting.
Yeah, well, I think this is basically what we're leaving with is being more mindful about about whatever our practices are. Totally worthwhile. Steve, I have taken you way over time, and I really appreciate it. This has actually been a really fascinating and extremely helpful conversation for me.
Thanks. I've enjoyed it, and it's nice to talk about these things. We've just dug into some things I don't often talk about or I haven't reflected on as much. So we know from user research, people like getting the chance to do that. So I like that. Thank you for this.
I'm glad I could afford you the opportunity for some reflection.